and welcome to office hours for the last week in May. So for these end of the month sessions on office hours, instead of just a general Q&A, we pick a specific topic and we get our panel to do some show and tell as well as answering your questions.
Yeah.
And this time we are going to talk about Salesforce and accounting systems. And I'm just going to, there's one other person I'm going to mute. There we go. So we're going to start this session with Susan, and she's going to tell us about some of the integration options with financial systems. I think you're going to look briefly at Financial Force and Intact and quite a few different systems, Susan. And then we're going to have a conversation about why you might choose not to integrate. And Jason is going to give us some guidance on some best practice and workarounds for if you decide to keep your accounting system separate. And we'll see what comes out of all of that. So if you have questions as we're talking, please feel free to post them in chat, and I will be monitoring the chat and we'll pause to answer them if it fits with the conversation, or we'll get to it when we get a break. And otherwise, since there are a lot of us on the call, we'd be grateful if you could mute your mic throughout the session, unless you're presenting, of course, or we ask you to speak. And I'm just going to go through and mute a few other people who are just joining us. So that's great. So questions into chat, please. Keep your mic muted, and I think Susan's already getting herself ready for the presentation. So Susan, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I was cleaning up my screen and then I was like, oh, I'm actually presenting. So can everybody see our screen? And I start with our regular PowerPoints, and just because some people aren't aware of who I am and why I get to talk about this subject is I'm an Intact certified implementation specialist. I spent 5 years working at Financial Force. I have 7 Salesforce certifications. I'm the Salesforce user group leader or co-leader in Providence. I'm a former CPA, so for those that don't know, that's a certified public accountant. And I've spent the last 22 years implementing accounting software systems. So they're definitely near and dear to my heart.
You're also the first person who's done a formal introduction to themselves on office hours. So there you go.
Well, I just figured, and then this is our, we want to give everybody a complete experience, our little slide. So we've added a couple of things there. So, all right. So the meat of the work here. So, so I took a look at the ones that are pretty popular, and I know there's a few other ones that kind of sneak in and out, but these are the big ones that we've kind of been seeing lately. We've got the 3 that are on Salesforce, which actually are Salesforce apps native to the platform and use all the platform pieces, and those are Financial Force, Sage Live, and Accounting Seed. And then the other 3 that we hear a lot about, and I didn't look at anything that was really not, except for QuickBooks, anything that is premise-based. I'm looking at cloud because most of the people that are dealing with Salesforce want to put something in the cloud. So the other ones are Intact, Financial Edge, NXT, and QuickBooks. Intact is not a Salesforce app, but if you look at their website, it's hard to tell that they're not. They have a pretty strong integration. They've embedded Chatter in their org, and they've been working with Salesforce for a long time, but it is an external and does require an integration. Okay. Financial Edge NXT is still pretty new, but if Financial Edge on-premise is any indication, it's going to be hard to integrate to that. But I know we see a lot of nonprofits using it. And then QuickBooks is pretty popular. It's definitely not a Salesforce app. It has very limited pieces, and we'll talk a little bit more about the integration options in a few minutes. Some of the modules that are available for these pieces, you're going to see that they all have GL, AP, AR, the bank modules, some billing modules, RevRec, on some of them, fixed assets reporting, and then Financial Force and Intact, Accounting Seed, Financial Edge all have some kind of supply chain, which is purchase orders, that kind of piece. When we're talking about supply chain, you can see that Financial Force, Intact, Accounting Seed, again, Financial Edge, they are going to have projects, time and entry pieces, not necessarily payroll, but those pieces. And then Financial Force has an HCM product that is native to the system as well. Intact and some of the others have add-ons to human capital management, which is the HR benefits, performance management, that kind of piece. But they're not native to the actual system. And then a piece of information that I think is important, and so I've included it here, is number of employees for each of these companies. And I think what I'm looking at here is support. So if you've got a bunch of modules and you don't have very many employees, I'm wondering how good the support and kind of things are. And so when I'm looking at which software we recommend and which software we're going to look at, you know, I know we've picked Financial Force, Intact, and Sage, and we won't deal with anything that doesn't talk to Salesforce. So we're not going to do Financial Edge, and we're going to help you with QuickBooks, but I'm going to leave Accounting Seed alone because I think they may have an issue supporting the number of modules they're trying to put out there. So.
And there's just a couple of other ones that get mentioned here, Susan. I don't know whether you've come across them. Holly asks if anyone's using Great Plains. And the other one is that Stuart has asked about Sage Live, if they do fund accounting. Yes, we're getting another another question about that. So let's just Great Plains. Have you come across that one?
So I worked with Great Plains back when it was Microsoft SQL Server, and I know that it's going to the 365 model. I think that we're going to see, although it's definitely more open than some of the other ones. I mean, I think they're going to lean towards integrating back to the Microsoft CRM rather than trying to integrate into Salesforce. They're really kind of competitors that way.
Okay.
We also see NetSuite, which I don't think anybody's mentioned, but again, that was purchased by Oracle. So I think we're going to see more of those being integrated back to Oracle instead of into Salesforce.
Yeah. Okay, and then so thanks for that. And then yes, from both Stuart and Michael, issues around fund accounting and wondering which of these systems would support fund accounting.
So most of these will support fund accounting. Both Financial Force and Intact do it. And again, Sage Live, I really haven't dealt into Accounting Seed, and we're going to leave some of Financial Edge and QuickBooks. I know Financial Edge does it because that's one of the bread and butters. But they deal with fund accounting using what's called dimensions. And so Sage doesn't call them dimensions. I can't remember what they call them, but it's basically a tagging mechanism so that you can deal with you tag the transactions to belong to a specific fund. So all of your transactions get tagged that are related to different funds, and that allows you to do the fund accounting through reporting. Intact has a little bit better controls right now as to how to enforce the fund designation, so making sure it requires or balanced. I know Financial Force and Sage Live are both working on those systems. And some of that can be done through, in Financial Force and Sage Live, through the native Salesforce pieces, using workflow and process builder and validation rules.
That's great. Yes, and there's That's very useful, and I know that Stuart is mentioning Abila, MIP Fund Accounting, which is also going to the cloud. Yeah, I have a client that's using that one as well, but it doesn't have a direct Salesforce integration, as far as I'm aware. You have to use one of those connectors.
Yeah, there's quite a few that are out there that are additional to a lot of different ones. There's a client that we're working with that has AccuFund. There's different pieces, and I think that the big question is if they say they integrate to Salesforce, it's great. What I think people need to really make sure that if they do say they integrate to Salesforce, how do they integrate? Because I know with AccuFund they do integrate to Salesforce, but that's a very limited integration between opportunities and payments through to their deposits, and it only comes in as one customer. So the answer, when the client asks the question of does it integrate to Salesforce, the answer is yes, because that's what AccuFund is using, and it works just fine for their business, so they have a link. But if you're looking at our client, that's not going to support it, and that's not going to work the way they need it for donations and different pieces. So I think if you're looking at something, asking what the integration is key if you're interested in that, because there's a number of different accounting systems out there. So Xero is replacing. So Xero is the QuickBooks in the rest of the world. QuickBooks is very popular in the US, and Xero is similar to it, but it's in the UK. So that rest of the world uses more of Xero than QuickBooks.
So that's great, and I mean, we can talk a little bit more about this in a minute. I mean, I think it's great that you've listed up there whether something is actually a Salesforce app, or has a piece that lives within Salesforce, or is built on Salesforce, and then there are these other systems that people have been mentioning that you need some kind of connector or integration tool. I'm going to let you kind of carry on with your next slide, Susan, because I'm sure you're going to come and talk about that a little bit more.
Okay, so integrations. So for Intact, there's basically 3, and there's going to be extras that we'll talk about when we're talking about anything that's going from Salesforce. I think that you're going to be able to use Boomi or Jitterbit or any of those existing. I think when I'm talking about these 3, I mentioned Ricardo because they actually have a recipe that's written. So if you're not the technical person and you need to create that recipe, if you're trying to put it on a piece of tool and you don't have somebody that's technical, these are the 3 that kind of are already built. Intact has a standard Intact connector, which currently doesn't work with all facets of NPSP. Armenia, which is a partner of Intact, has a scribe hosted connector that works with both NPSP and the name's escaping me, the other nonprofit piece. And GeoConnect, thank you. And then the Ricardo recipes connect to NPSP and different pieces. Financial Edge, as far as I know, does not have an integration. QuickBooks Online, there's a new app that's actually native to Salesforce called QuickBook Connect. There's Ricardo, there's AutoFi. One of the nice things about Ricardo versus AutoFi is Ricardo will definitely do other things other than just the QuickBooks. AutoFi will only do the QuickBooks to Salesforce. And then QuickBooks Desktop, you've got DB Sync and AutoFi. And again, there's a whole slew of integration tools that come into Salesforce that are available that can do a lot of this, but these are some of the standard connections. And do we have specific questions on this?
I think there's a bit of chatter going on here about QuickBooks Online and whether you should integrate it or not. We can come back to that in a little bit. And Warren is chiming in on some Workato examples.
Okay.
So keep going, Susan.
All right. So the next slide I have is why connect? Why do I think we should connect? And I did put a link into a blog post that we posted that was originally on Salesforce.org. I think that you're seeing a lot of, and these are complaints that we've heard. It's duplicate data in the system. So if you're not connecting, you've got stuff in Salesforce and then stuff in your accounting system, and they don't always sync. And which one's right and which one's the piece of record? I think there's a lot of paper approvals or paper requests that go back and forth, where if you can automate and link the systems, you don't need that. Old data, and what I mean by that is if you're going to do reporting and the systems aren't syncing, you may have a week-old data, or you may have month-old data, or even day-old data in your system. So you're not necessarily getting the most up-to-date system, where if you're syncing things back and forth, you're getting that data. Your reporting, forecasting, data tracking is in multiple systems, and a lot of times you have to revert back to that Excel so you can pull the data you need, or another tool that's going to integrate those pieces instead of being able to do it. I think it leads to a lot of inefficient process flows because you've got, you're working around what your business is doing. Again, you've got limited access to data because your development team may not have information on who's paid or what's coming in or the status of projects. And then your accounting team may or may not be able to see the stuff that's going on in Salesforce. And I think that it's a lot of times, if you haven't connected it, you have old technology and an older user face. And I think it's just hard to get all that data out. So that's part of the reason I think we should connect. I know that we're going to have a discussion on why not to connect. I agree there's a lot of pluses and minuses, and bad data to bad data is never good. So I think there's definitely a discussion on this, and there can be individual pieces onto why or why not. But my thought is, in general, we want to connect those. So, and that's all I've got for prepared slides.
So let's just dig in from it before we get to the knots. Could you talk a little bit about the difference between having an external system like QuickBooks that you do some kind of connection? What's the difference if you decide to go the whole hog and have something like Financial Force, for example, or Accounting Seed?
So something with, obviously it's native to the platform. I think that you've got a lot of benefits there, where you've got single users, the data is in there. It's a similar tool. So if you're writing a Salesforce report, it's a Salesforce report. There are some specific reporting tools for presentation quality reporting, but your basic reporting, if you've got a development manager that's been working in Salesforce and he can do a dashboard or something in Salesforce, you can do one with the Financial Force Sage or Accounting Seed data. So I think that the reporting there is critical in different pieces. Again, the workflows and the processes. So if you've got an approval process and you're using something that's in QuickBooks, you can't go look at a value, or you can't go look at an accounting manager, or you can't validate some of the GL accounts pieces. To that, and that's part of the duplicate data. If you've got GL accounts in one place and not the other, and somebody does an update, you don't have new updates. So I think those are critical pieces. Intact's a little bit of a hybrid because it's so tightly integrated that there definitely is. It's more of a. It's still an update. It's still an external system, but there's a lot of data that can pull through because of the way they've got the APIs and the different pieces that they've written, so that it's a more of a real time, and there are some users that can look through Salesforce into the Intact data using that technology. So it's you're actually looking at live data. It's not synced. You're looking across through to the Intact data. So that one's a little bit of a hybrid.
Oh, that's interesting. That kind of bridges the two. Could you go back a couple of slides to your one that had the Salesforce app? Your sort of summary slide. So the ones that essentially, I believe is it Financial Force and Accounting Seed are the ones that would feel like you're working in Salesforce, kind of whichever side of the system that you're in.
Yeah,
Right?
Financial Force, Sage Live, and Accounting Seed are all native to the platform. So
Okay.
they look and feel, and they are Salesforce. They're App Exchange packages like anything else. So they use the same users, they use the same security, they use workflow and approvals. You can use Process Builder, any of the Salesforce tools there. They may have, I believe they're all, I know Accounting Seed and Sage Live are lightning ready, and Financial Force is close. It has a few more modules and has been out a little bit longer, but they're all going to be in Lightning shortly, if they're not already. So it's the same look and feel. If you've got somebody that's already using Salesforce, we don't have to do that training. And you've also, if you've got a Salesforce admin, that person can do a lot of this admin. You don't need a separate admin for your accounting system.
And what happens about licenses? Does everyone, is it just your financial team that requires licenses for the financial piece? Or would every user need some kind of license for
So
this?
they have a little bit of a different, there's different models with each case, and Intact's kind of a little bit included with this, but most of these are platform type licenses for Sage Live and Accounting Seed, so it sits on top, which means it only uses accounts. It doesn't use opportunities and products. If the system uses opportunity and products, so like with Accounting Seed, if you start using orders and inventory, it's going to start looking at opportunities and products in Salesforce, and so you would need a full Salesforce license to do some of those integrations. Financial Force, because it's heavily based with, in the way it was written, with opportunities and products, you would need a full Salesforce license, and they have a particular licensing deal with Salesforce where they'll sell those licenses at a little bit more of a reduced rate. But mostly they're platform type licenses that get sold. If you do want to look into, if you have a development manager that wants to look into any of these systems, generally they have what's called a read-only license that they use, which is cheaper. So your accounting people would use what, and they all call it a little bit different, but basically what we say is if they're going to create transactions in the system, then they need a full accounting license. If not, they can get away with a read-only or executive license, depending on what this particular company calls it, because they're all a little bit different on licensing.
So is one of the big issues here, obviously there are great advantages to having your accounting system in Salesforce, as you say, for the sort of sharing of information, but is one of the big issues here is about cost?
I don't know that it's cost. I think there's definitely, so Intact has been around for a lot longer. I think, QuickBooks has been around for a long time, and there's definitely some issues between QuickBooks Online and QuickBooks Desktop as far as functionality. Financial Edge has been around a long time. So I think that what you're seeing is some of these systems that have been built from the ground up, like Financial Force, Sage Live, Accounting Seed, some of the functionality isn't 100% there, so it's more built out and Intact. But again, you're leverage, you're not on the platform. So if you're trying to build something that's completely on the platform, Intact may not be the right fit. If you have some very complex requirements, Intact may better fit that piece. And that's definitely something that, when we're doing a project, we do a lot of work into which one's the best fit. And then if there are pluses and minuses, we try to highlight what those are individually and point them out so that you can make decisions. And sometimes it's the IT staff that's making the decisions. They want to see it all on the platform, and sometimes accounting is driving it, and so they want to make sure they get as much functionality. So, and they're all continually changing and improving.
Do any of these companies offer non-profit discounts? That was a question.
They all offer nonprofit discounts. They all do.
Great. And do they, on the whole, do you need to, are there sort of additional setup costs? I mean, do you have to work through the company? Can you work through a registered partner? How does the setup work?
Accounting Seed, I don't believe uses a partner model. Sage Live does have a partner model, although it's kind of like QuickBooks, where it's a lower end at this point, where if you got a savvy user, you could set it up yourself. Financial Force, Intact are both partner based. That you can go direct through them, but again, they won't do some of the Salesforce pieces and things. So if you're looking for somebody to do the entire piece, you may want to go with a partner. But you can go direct, and there definitely is implementation. A little bit of rule of thumb is, whatever and it's a little bit different, but there's definitely you're going to spend, trying to think last couple I did, it used to be 2-to-1 services to licensing. It's a little bit different with the SaaS model, but there's still the first year the implementation is going to be higher than your first year licensing, and then you've got your recurring licensing fee. So they're not cheap systems, but I think they're can definitely benefit. And then it's also dependent on, you can reduce some of the fees depending on what your staff can handle or what you can do yourself versus which modules you need or data migration pieces.
Yeah, and there's always that issue of kind of, I suppose, how wedded your finance department are, how much they love the system they've got already, isn't it? Or whether they're
Yeah.
ready for a change as well, because if they're kind of embracing the Salesforce piece of this, that helps too.
Yes. Yep. Yep. Well, and there's new accounting pieces that come out and new reporting, and so there's upgrades and things. So there's definitely, I think there's a lot of push to for the financial edge users that are using the current system, because they're pushing everybody to NXT. And so if they're financial edge users right now, are they going to evaluate just the financial edge NXT, or they're going to look to other solutions as well, because they need to make a change, because they're kind of being pushed internally to go to the cloud-based piece. So there's a lot of the systems aren't being kept up. Some of the older systems, they're starting to end functionality for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, which kind of leads us quite nicely, perhaps we could talk a little bit about QuickBooks, because I see that there are some questions that have been coming in about it. And maybe, Warren, it seems like you might be able to talk to this a little bit. So yeah, there's definitely been some discussion going on in the chat here about between QuickBooks Online and QuickBooks Desktop. Let's start with you, since you're on the line, Susan. I mean, what's your feeling about QuickBooks Online and Desktop, and what do you recommend to clients now?
I try really hard not to recommend QuickBooks, although I.
Oh, well, there you go. That's honest.
Well, I mean, having been around it for years and having some accounting knowledge and some IT knowledge, I think you can rob it blind because it doesn't have a lot of audit controls. I think they've gotten better. I think for what you get for the value and the support, I think you get a lot for it. So I think there's a lot of people that it's a low cost entry. So I don't recommend it, but we do run into people that have it. And I understand why, and that's controlled. I have a couple places that have it, and it's being controlled by the owners, so there's less of that audit risk, or that who's actually using it. I think that QuickBooks Online has very limited functionality, and the clients that we've seen where we're trying to migrate data out of QuickBooks Online to into any of the other systems, we're having a hard time getting the data out of the system. Whereas QuickBooks Desktop, you can definitely get a lot of data out of the system. To an extent where we have talked to a couple of different clients about, if they want a lot of data left, used from QuickBooks, it may be easier to get QuickBooks to convert their QuickBooks Online to a desktop version and put it on a desktop and use that for historical lookups rather than try to migrate a lot of data just because you can't get the data out.
Oh, that's an interesting one. Um, while we're on, there are a couple of interesting questions have come up that we can go off that, but just while we're on this QuickBooks Online desktop, Jason, you had put something in chat about QuickBooks Online. Do you want to, and issues with the integration? Do you want to speak to that for a moment?
Yeah, sure. So this was for a client that I was working with recently, and they were looking at different ways to try to integrate QuickBooks Online. And so I started a trial just so I could play with a few different options, and this was in response to I think John, I want to say, was asking if anyone else has had issues with it because he's heard that occasionally it's maybe unreliable. And just in my experience, I created my trial and then it was basically unusable for the first 3 or 4 hours after that. Like it was just having server issues, or I don't know. And maybe that's the first time that's ever happened, but it was just interesting to me that, I create a trial and then right off the bat, it's having issues. For me, that's not 99% reliable. That's like 50. But again, anecdotal example, so who knows?
And I think part of it is they've got so many users, and there's a lot that are not, or it's not sophisticated users, so they don't, they're not expecting a lot. So if it's down, they kind of ignore some pieces. So, they just kind of come back and try it again later. But yeah, I think it's, the sophistication of the users that, oh, it's down, I'll just do something later. Because, if you can't get to a website or your bank's down or whatever, oh, I'll try it again later,
Right. And I guess I would compare and contrast it to Salesforce. Like if a server is having login issues or anything in Salesforce, I mean, there's a whole big deal about it. Like it's, they make everyone aware of it. There's usually a follow-up report about why it happened and how it's going to be prevented in the future. Whereas I never really heard anything after this, the QuickBooks Online issue. Like that was just sort of the end of it, it seemed like. And again, that's just my personal experience in a trial account, so I can't speak to the system as a whole.
Yeah, and I think you're also getting some of what you're paying for. There's definitely things that you don't get because you are using QuickBooks and it's the lower entry price.
Yeah,
for sure.
A question from one of the Johns. For the native Salesforce option, so things like Financial Force, the ones that have a Salesforce app, can you add custom fields to their objects?
Yep, you can completely add custom fields and any of the other things you can do in Salesforce. It's a Salesforce native app.
And does that? And what about Intact, which is the hybrid? Do you have the ability to customize that too?
You can. Coming from the Salesforce world and learning Intact, it's frustrating because you don't get to say where it is on the page. You can add them, but they go in a certain spot, and you can't do a lot of customization of page layouts. So there's, like I said, there's definitely pluses and minuses when you start looking at, what are the specific requirements of people, because it definitely is. The interface is a little frustrating. I know Intact's working on improving that. I don't know, if they're going to go more like Salesforce with the flexibility, but that's definitely one thing that frustrates me is, I'm going to add a custom field and it's going to go to the bottom of the page, not up where I want to see it for the use of the, you know, and being able to, you know, in Salesforce, being able to drag off, you know, our financial force fields that they don't use, you know, and just hide them, and you know, and you can't do that in Intact. So there's definitely some limitations in Intact not being a native platform app. There's also some pluses and minuses, and one of the things that's interesting is that Intact, everybody's on the same version because they're all in the same cloud. With Financial Force and Sage Live Accounting Seed, because you are installing it into your own instance, it's easier to keep more up to date, and it's going to work with Salesforce, but everybody's not all on that same cloud. So the version does need to be upgraded for Financial Force, Sage Live, or Accounting Seed. Whereas Intact, when they do an upgrade, everybody gets the upgrade.
Got it. That's an interesting and useful point. So there's a great question here from Sarah Matheny. Hi, Sarah. And I think this may kind of lead us actually into a bit into the next part of the conversation. She's talking about the double entry accounting. So she says, she asks, have you seen any major architecture issues between Salesforce and accounting systems in regards to double entry accounting? Salesforce was never designed to perform accounting, so I've seen some general architecture conflicts with clients expecting to perform accounting type functionality in Salesforce. Let's talk about these systems first, and then I think that might kind of lead us on into what you have to look out for if you don't integrate. So what do you think, architecture and double entry accounting?
So I think there's definitely that risk, and there's having worked for Financial Force for a number of years, there's a lot of clients that you know, were mistakenly thought we were Salesforce, or you know, that I mean financial that we were Salesforce, that it was actually part of Salesforce, and they didn't get that, you know, there's a different application, or that, you know, they needed different licenses. But I think that's one of the reasons, you know, when you're picking your consultant, and you're looking at the business process, and a lot of times people put in Salesforce and then they go and figure out which accounting system afterwards. And I'm a big proponent of it's okay to look and decide things later, or put it in different phases, but I think that you should do all the planning up front, so that you don't design something in Salesforce that then won't support the accounting side. And there's a lot of things that happen with, say, opportunities when you're sending it through to your GL in any of the systems, where you have to create both sides of the entry from that opportunity. And that's where, you know, Process Builder or Visual Workflow triggers, or even some of the tools that are native to Financial Force, or some of the other pieces for integrating those pieces, is critical. Because you want to keep the double, you know, the double-sided. And I know there's been some discussion internally to Cloud for Good around the GAUs and what to do with those. And I haven't gotten to a sprint yet, but I think that's something that, as that comes up, that's probably a good question to ask or talk about.
Yeah, I mean, they're called general accounting units, but they're not necessarily what your accountant would recognize as general accounting units, I think.
Right, but there is some expectation that that should work that way. Why doesn't it work that way? Or how do we tie that into our accounting system? And you're missing a half. So
yeah. So maybe this is a good point to kind of move on to just talk a little bit about what happens if you don't integrate, because definitely there's this double entry. I think the other issue I've heard about is, and maybe Jason, you've got some thoughts on this, is about that sometimes the accounting system, what you understand as the customer or the client, can be different to how Salesforce would view a customer or a client?
Is that my cue?
Yeah, it's your cue.
Okay. Yeah, I would definitely agree that that's one of the things I see. To be honest, with all the clients I've worked with, no one's ever followed through with a plan to integrate their accounting system with Salesforce, if they even had that plan to begin with. And that's definitely one of the major issues, is like what they're tracking as like you said, like a customer in Salesforce doesn't necessarily mesh up with what they like, how the accounting side tracks it. Another big thing I see is, depending on what system you're using, like if you can like customize either your invoices or your invoice number, or like a field, somehow you need to create a custom field in one of the two systems, right? Either Salesforce, which obviously you can do, or your accounting system, so that you can keep them in sync, because otherwise there's no way to reconcile anything if they're not tracking in some capacity the same information. So really, I think the biggest issues I see and the reasons that people don't follow through, the first is cost, honestly. That stops up a lot of people, because to get a really good integration, or to move to a really good accounting app, there's always a cost associated with that. If there's a really cheap way to do that that's also super effective, I would personally love to hear about that, because I would go recommend it to everyone. But so far, I'm not aware of anything that sort of like bridges all the gaps without breaking the bank. The next thing is like basically in the vein of Caroline, what you were saying with the idea of what a customer or client is, and it's also, I think, in a larger capacity, is just sometimes like your accounting or like your financial people, they have their way of doing things, and the rest of the team, they perform things differently, and maybe it just doesn't make sense for both sides to switch. So you keep them kind of siloed that way. And there is a sort of a benefit to that too, and that's through the idea, I think, of like auditing. So if you have two separate detached systems, you can sort of, if something doesn't look right in one system, you can refer to the other, and if there's a discrepancy, then that's something that needs to be tracked. Whereas if those systems are integrated completely, then there's really, why would there ever be a discrepancy? And so if something gets entered wrong, it's immediately entered wrong in both systems. And so and I guess I should say, like, I'm not an accountant. I don't deal with money. I deal with Salesforce. So, I mean, maybe this is just things that I've heard from my clients. And so maybe that's not an issue, but that is what people have said to me, that like some people frankly just like having two separate systems so that they have a way to back check things that they do. And I think that actually goes back to a comment that was posted in the chat earlier, where like Salesforce was just never designed to be an accounting system. So, I mean, those are really the main reasons that people choose not to integrate. And so if you aren't actually going to integrate your accounting system, but you still need some way to have the, Salesforce and your accounting interact with each other, you have really two options, I think. You either just double enter everything, which obviously is twice as much work, but it gives you the ability to audit either system against each other. So there is a benefit in that. Or if you can customize some bit of data in one of the two systems so that they can share an invoice number or some other identifying factor in common, then you can start just setting up regular reports, which is what I've had some clients do. Basically, assuming you can, in your accounting system, you can specify your invoice numbers, they just set like an auto number on opportunity and make that be your invoice number. And then you just run weekly reports for opportunities and payments, or you can combine them and do a report that is opportunities with or without payments. You export that, and you can just either review it and manually enter it into the accounting system at that point, or if there is an import functionality in your system, you could use it just to do like an insert and update operation into the accounting based on that report. And I was going to, and I'm sorry, I wish that I had an example of a report, but really, I mean, it's more or less any standard opportunity and payment report should work, because I think, you know, we have a pretty good idea about what information you want to see. Like it's the money, if it's been paid or not, and when that happened. And obviously, like I said, an invoice number so that you can track it across both systems. Those are really the essential bits, and then it's just personal preference at that point, and you know what you need for your particular system. So the report honestly could differ slightly from from organization to organization. And I mean, that's really it. Like it just comes down to you're either running reports or you're just double entering. And for whatever reason, I mean, that's, like I said, pretty much every client I've worked with has decided that they're going to do it that way and keep the system separate.
I'll let Susan talk to the what say you to this kind of audit concern, the idea that if something's incorrect in one system and the two systems are linked, that will.
So I think the first part I'm going to address is the cost. So I think if you're double entering things and you have two manual entries, I think you increase your chance of being wrong, and there's a man-hour cost to doing that, as well as a frustration cost for the employees to manually enter both things. I think that if you're taking data out of one system and bringing it into the other system, that is an integration, whether it's automatic or manual. So at that, I'm going to define that a little bit. And I think that the audit, being able to follow through and find reconciliation issues on the system, I think that's part of setting up the right processes to begin with and making sure that you've got the two different pieces. I will say that accountants like to control certain things. And so a lot of times I know they want to have their little domain and not let anybody else in, and want to be able to control things a certain way. But I think that you know, if you start looking at audit standards and Sarbanes-Oxley and trying to reduce the amount of manual entry or Excel data sheets that are happening out there, I think that a lot of auditors would come back and say that you know, the manual entry in the Excel is causing issues and can be corrupted easier than a system that is attached and can be audited and has processes. I think bad processes are bad processes, and putting in bad processes is not going to solve the issues, but I think if you do have the good processes in place, then it does work. But I will agree that money it can definitely be an issue.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, like you said, it might come out even, honestly, if you think like, well, if we are literally having to like spend the man hours to double enter all of this, like you would be saving that cost if you were just paying for an integration system. But at the same time, I think it's somewhat easier to justify having the people to do it, like to a lot of organizations, you know, especially smaller nonprofit organizations, than saying we have to pay this much money monthly to integrate the systems. Like it's easier to justify man hours than it is additional like app cost.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it can be right depending on who you're talking to. I think it's, you know, you definitely have to be more forward facing on some of this, but I think that, you know, there's definitely a satisfaction issue, or, you know, whether you've got somebody that, you know, you're paying somebody to be a data entry person, or you're paying somebody to be an analyst and help move the program forward rather than just, you know, doing something by rote. So, I mean, there's definitely a lot of clients and definitely a lot of people that don't want to integrate and don't want to do this and want to keep it status quo. But I think that there's definitely a lot of savings in different pieces where if they do integrate, they're going to save a lot of time and/or money.
So you think it maybe would, like, you'd end up not necessarily saving more money, but like you could justify it more if you look at the big picture instead of just like the sticker shock of saying, oh my God, this is going to cost me $300 a month just to connect the two systems.
I think they, in the long run, I think they'd save money. Generally, I think in the short run, maybe not, but in the long run, I think they're going to definitely save money. I think it needs to be shown that way, and I think there's historical trends towards the saving and the piece. And and I think that you need to, they need to look at all the costs, as far as looking at employee satisfaction and benefits and payroll taxes and some of those things, is in growth of your company, your clients, growth of your employees, and are they just doing data entry, or are they actually helping to help the the mission and move things forward. So I think there's there are some soft costs that you have to look at that maybe they're not including when they're looking at the costs. They're looking strictly at the hard costs. So I think it may be a presentation thing.
Okay.
Nice comment from Carrie Waldrip. Thank you for that. We decided that integration is better than double entry. With history tracking and audit trails, a single source of truth for accounts, etc., we prefer integration so that the numbers match, even if something is incorrect. A key, like you said, Susan, is the thoughtful processes that are consistently followed by users in both Salesforce and the accounting system. Thank you. That's a very nice summary. And John had asked just above that about anyone who is using any of these native, the native apps within the accounting systems, and if so, how do you like them? Please could, if you are using one of these systems, please could you post in chat whether you like it or not, just your comments, because there are a couple of specific questions that I'd like to touch on. Jana asked a little while ago, what about the new CPQ billing from Salesforce? Have any of the panel seen it, and how does it compare?
So CPQ, I've seen it. I think that having, when I worked for Financial Force, we did a lot with for-profit businesses, and it's really configure, price, quote towards the selling end, and I think there may be some nonprofits that could leverage that information. But I think your traditional nonprofit is not doing a lot of that configure, price, quote. They're doing more of the fundraising and things. So I think that the CPQ is very specific. It's not a full accounting system. It's kind of a front end to the sales side of the cycle.
Great, thank you for that. Sarah asked, do Financial Force and Sage Live provide a batch gift entry tool? Oh, so many people want a batch gift entry tool.
So that you mean like something, and
so
I'm going to use.
If you had a big pile of checks, for example, that had come in and you wanted to really quickly enter them, like they're all going into the same campaign or they're all coded the same way or whatever, something to speed up getting those into the system, the amounts into the system.
So there's definitely the different, I can't speak to Sage on that particular one, but there definitely are different ways to import things into Financial Force, whether it's, at that point you may want to look at where they're coming from, or they do have customizable input forms in Financial Force. There's another name for it, but it's basically a batch entry tool to speed up and use more defaults. You can also look at a specific screen that's using some workflow to limit to fill in different pieces or fill them in from other places. So if you've got a campaign and you're doing an entry from there using some of the Salesforce functionality, you could keep going through and doing like cash receipts or things from there using some of the functionality that exists that goes out and actually does some of these things behind the scenes. So you're not having to put in all the data, but you're getting that batch functionality. I don't know that they actually have the batch, but there's definitely ways to get around that speed issue.
Great. And then we're getting towards time, but a couple of people are asking thoughts on whether if you integrate summarized data or if you have all of the detail in both systems.
So my recommendation is that, and from the point of having tried to do this, and I had a client that said we were going to do all the data in manually. So I would say there is no data entry from transactional point of view. So it's all entered into the GL for anything, whether you do summary or detailed. You can do either. A lot of times what we see is the last year or last 2 years is a detail entry. So there's, each transaction in your GL is detailed entry. Prior to that, you're doing it for comparison purposes more than anything else. And so you're getting summaries, so month by month data. If you try to go back and reinvent what happened, there's just too many variables. We had a client that was on QuickBooks and they decided that they really wanted to do all that entry and they wanted to have all that history, and we gave them a huge quote to do it and they said, let's go. We spent a year trying to do it for them to get all that stuff in, but it just, we spent a year and then went back to what we had recommended originally. We spent a lot of money and time trying to do it, and you just run into issues where you have a AP voucher that comes in, there were a couple short, or there was a credit. You had to write the check and then something bounced, or there was an adjustment, or there was a credit from the vendor, and some of them went in fine, but there was a lot of these ones that were one-ofs where there were particularly things that you had to go and trying to recreate all that from history was just nuts. So that's my answer to the integration pieces or the historical migration pieces.
Interesting. Any thoughts, Jason or Warren, on that as well?
Sorry, I was participating in a separate chat conversation here with John Fine.
Well, that's fine. Well, actually, and that's quite an interesting, yes, because you're talking about detail, I think, and campaign. And have you got 2 minutes to just summarize what you and John have been chatting about?
Absolutely, yeah. So John was asking what people's preference is when it comes to tracking what we're calling here sub-account details. For example, like what campaign a donation is affiliated with, or what membership level of renewal was, things like that. If we should track those in both systems or just Salesforce or what. And my response was that in my experiences, people tend to lean towards just tracking that in Salesforce because it just ends up being more information than you need on the accounting side. But he is saying that his ED does not feel that way because they consider QuickBooks to be the, as we put it, the king of financial data rather than Salesforce. And that's a tough one. I mean, convincing someone to change their opinion on that, I don't know. Like Susan said, like when people have very strong opinions about accounting, and especially accountants, like they sort of like things the way they like them. So I really can't think of just on the spot an argument that would change someone's mind on that if they're pretty stuck in their ways. If anyone else has one, then I'd love to hear it.
The only one I've ever come across is if they're paying for data, and you're paying for data in 2 places. And I think that if you're using something that's native to Salesforce, you're taking it from one place in Salesforce and moving it to another location in Salesforce and paying for it twice, which with the finance mindset has gotten some people to go, oh. But I think there's definitely some strong strong control and strong opinions on the fact that, you know, we want it all in our accounting system, and that's our system of record, and all the detail needs to be there because we don't trust Salesforce or whatever, you know, CRM product we're using or other system. So it may be a battle you can't fight, but the data battle is generally, you know, where it hits them, in that they may be paying more for data, but it's all there. Sometimes you have, you know, sometimes you have to prove it to them in a demo or whatever, but a lot of times you won't, you know, you just gotta give in and say, here you go.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's gonna cost you more to write the integration. It's gonna cost you more for the data, but here you go.
And there's, but also putting another side to it, Leslie, thank you for the suggestion, Leslie. See that you can show better reports and easier access to those reports from Salesforce as a way to try and win people over. And as John Fine points out, a budget can't come straight out of QuickBooks. So yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think it also all ties up with this, again, with the whole idea of relationships. And I mean, what you're tracking in Salesforce is not just the money, is it? It's the relationship you have with the person who is providing the money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. We are a little over time, and since we're approaching our holiday weekend, I'm very conscious, and I think we could carry on talking about this for ages. But I'm very grateful to the panel for making this, for making the time, and this would be a great conversation to continue in the Power of Us Hub. So I do encourage people to do that. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Susan. Thank you for preparing the slides and bringing so much information. Thank you, Jason, for your contributions as well. Thank you for everybody for the questions and the comments that have been posted in chat. Maybe we're going to need a follow-up session on this one, but I think it's a good one to have started and to have got things going. So thank you again to the panel. I have been recording the session. I'll make that available in the Power of Us Hub. As I say, please do keep the conversation going. We'll be back with a general Q&A session for office hours next week. But in the meantime, thank you again, and everybody have a really lovely weekend.
Yeah, and anybody that has any more questions, feel free to at me, and I'll try to answer and limit the sales pieces to a minimum.
Same for me.
No, that's great. It's excellent. I mean, you have a wealth of experience, Susan, which makes you a very valuable resource. So thank you very much. Great. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good one.
Thank you.